Welcome everybody. This is SharePoint Community Call. This is the May 2020. It is May 12th, and we're going to have a really nice community call as a monthly summary today with a special topic from Sesha Money. So my name is Esa Juvonen. I'm a program manager from the OneDrive SharePoint platform team, and our team is responsible on the development experience. But typically in these monthly community calls, it's not necessarily all about development. We might touch development topics, but it's really around more and more around the features and capabilities as well. So we're kind of transforming the monthly community calls away from the deep dive development extensibility to more on understanding what's possible, like today, where we're going to talk about the securing the data in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams with sensitivity labels. So really cool topic, and Sesha is the owner of this feature, who can actually cover that slightly later on. I'm going to take roughly 15 minutes. Now, we're going to do a quick recap still on the SharePoint development side, so latest news or some updates on the community side of the house. We're going to do acknowledgement of the community contributors in past month. This includes contributors in the documentation or in the GitHub or in the non-development documentation, so everybody who's been actively involved in our open source efforts. So let's actually move on. Quick recap on what kind of things we actually generate. Bi-weekly, we do have a multiple set of different layers in the community. We do have a channel in the tech community where you can ask questions. There's a SharePoint tech community section and the SharePoint dev tech community section. We do have a bi-weekly SharePoint framework community calls where we really deep dive on the SharePoint framework. Well, not deep dive on SharePoint framework necessarily, but cover the latest on SharePoint framework development extensibility. The other bi-weekly call has been rebranded, which I forgot about updating in here, as a general Microsoft 365 special interscope call. And they would talk about Yo teams, we talk about SharePoint provisioning, PowerShell, and all of those kind of topics. So that's happening every Thursday as well. This week, by the way, on Thursday's call, we're going to talk about Yo Teams, which is the YAML generator for Teams applications, and then also how to provision Teams structures using the open source community assets, which is pretty cool as well. And then we do have the monthly community call, which is this one, and the next one is on Tuesday, 9th of June. So every single second Tuesday of a month. And these calls are more positioned then as a Microsoft presenting. So we always will have a topic which we cover, like multilingual portals was the last one, and this time we're going to talk about the sensitivity labels from Sesha. So really cool stuff as well. Now, what's happening and what are the different assets? Just quickly recapping Microsoft 365 and SharePoint community videos, and not just dev videos, definitely is in the AKMS M365 PnP videos channel, where you can actually find videos from Mark Cashman showing how to build, for example, a crisis communication site, and that is a relatively new video. But there is some development videos, definitely development videos there as well. Teams and SharePoint on OneDrive and Microsoft Graph. We have open source assets, so github.com/SharePoint and github.com/PnP. We have SharePoint framework assets, AKMS SPFX, which is the SharePoint framework documentation. We have web parts extensions available for you, and we have the issue list if you have issues which you run into around extensibility models in the Microsoft 365. Now, quick updates on other updates from Microsoft side. So quickly introducing this one. So we do have a new Microsoft 365 patterns and practices landing page, relatively recent announcement. And this was released actually, I think last Wednesday or Thursday, where we actually have a really cool looking site where we're listing all of the different community calls, guidances, samples, and solutions, and SDKs and tools. So really one location to remember. There's 3 URLs on the slide, which is slightly confusing maybe, but all of those URLs are pointing to the same location, so you actually can see the same things. This site was designed by a SharePoint design team or members in the Microsoft SharePoint design team, and it looks really, really cool. So thank you for the feedback in the chat window as well. One thing what we also pretty recently did related on our open source assets and community efforts is that we shuffled slightly, once again, our GitHub repository structure to trying to make it more clear what are the repositories which are owned and coordinated only and solely by Microsoft, and then the organizations and projects and assets which are coordinated together with community. So the SharePoint organization, github.com/SharePoint, is really around the SharePoint and official SharePoint engineering organization, with official repositories managed and owned by Microsoft Engineering. And then the PnP organization is github.com/PnP, which is owned by the community with co-ownership with Microsoft side. So basically our samples and open source tooling can be found from this particular location. So we've been shuffling around with the repos. If you've been following up on what we've been doing for the past 5 or 6 years, we every now and then shuffle these things. Hopefully it makes more sense again for now until we reshuffle things again. That's a Microsoft way of doing stuff, right? That's a joke. Nobody's laughing. Yeah, I know, the story of my life. Now, few other things before we go to the actual topic of the day. One of the things what we're doing every single week is the PnP Weekly, where we cover always a specific topic together with one of our customer or partner, an MVP or non-MVP. We talk about, for example, let's say open source learnings, or what is the partner opportunity for Microsoft 365, or change management learnings for Microsoft 365. And these are released in every single Tuesday. They're recorded on Monday. So it's quite up-to-date topic. And we also cover the latest articles and community, Microsoft articles and community articles, which has been released. Please use the hashtag PnP Weekly when you are writing something in internet, so we can actually find you in Twitter. Quick recap on the UserVoice side of the house. Not that much changes in here. One point where I do want to actually just point out, the number 2, which is the add manage metadata term store operations and REST APIs. It is coming now. Original plan was to get the V2 endpoint out in May and then the graph endpoint out in June. I think we are shuffling that slightly, and it's going to come out as a graph endpoint automatically. But it's coming now in May or in June timeframe. So there will be a proper APIs for managing the managed metadata term store, which is the location, which will be basically the term store across the Microsoft 365 as well. So that's now finally coming. The number 1 item, which is super widely requested as well, is being actively worked on. And we've been saying that now for many, many years already, and we do apologize on that one. But the latest on that one is that I'm crossing fingers. I can't promise yet. We might get it out before this summer. But again, don't hold me accountable if that's not going to happen. So I cannot actually promise that yet, because I don't have a final confirmation from the people who are doing that. But we're pushing heavily on making that thing happen. Good. Few more slides before we let Shesha to talk about his topics. One of the things which we mentioned already a month ago, but now it's actually, there's a public blog post related on this one, is that we're introducing a new, larger Microsoft 365 PnP team. And this is basically the virtual team coordinating our open source efforts and on our open source activities. And this team is now consisting from a roughly 26 persons, which are internal and external MVPs or partner members. And these are basically people who are helping us on managing our open source assets, like the projects which we're executing, or helping within the documentation or in the guidance videos. So actively helping you to learn to adapt Microsoft 365 and the best practices on that side. So if you're seeing any of these people engaging with you in the GitHub, don't worry, they're actually actively working together with us as well. One thing which went live earlier today is the community update on the May 2020 community update, basically a summary in our blog post, which is listing all of the new samples, all of the contributors, all of the companies who have been actively involved within the last month on our open source assets. So there's a lot of people actually who've been involved in this area. The Twitter tweets went live like an hour ago, and the other ones will come out slightly later today as well. But thank you, everybody, once again on being super active in our open source community side of the house. This is the full list of people who've been contributing in our GitHub or in our open source assets within the last month. So during April, well, technically from mid-April until today, we basically then collected all of the group of people who've been actively contributing in any of our open source assets, either in the documentation or in the samples or in the open source tooling. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You are truly making a huge impact for helping people to adapt the platform as well. And one of the things which I want to reiterate as many times as needed. We really love this model where we work together with you as partners and customers, because you work on a day-to-day basis in the real world with the tools and services which we have built as a Microsoft. So you know how they should be working. So you know the best practices rather than we dictating certain things. So let's celebrate these people who are helping, making sure that the open source assets are being up to date, and our guidance is being up to date, and also the other people who've been actively sharing their learnings around our platform. Good. Just a quick recap also on the company side. So these are the names of the companies which logo we are allowed to show, from where those people have contributed. So the people have worked on these companies and they contributed in our open source assets. So thank you for these companies for allowing their employees to contribute and being active in our open source and community efforts. So thank you, thank you, thank you. This stuff has a huge impact on helping other people to adapt the right ways of extending our platform. And from Microsoft side, there's a lot of people. These are the most active Microsoft employees who've been closely involved in the April timeframe on this side. But I promised to do the quick intros in 15 minutes, and I'm actually hitting that. It is 14 past 6 p.m. on my location. Sesha, that gives you 45 minutes. I know that you can speak many hours on your topic, but I think 45 minutes is decent.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Vesa. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
Sesha, we can see your screen. I think we're good to go, so take it away.
All righty. Thank you very much, Vesa, and thank you all for this great opportunity to share with you what our team is up to in the context of security and compliance. And today I'm going to focus on specifically around securing your data in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams with the sensitivity labels. Some of you might already know me. I'm Sesha Mani. I'm a principal group product manager at Microsoft. I've been in this security and compliance industry for many years, specifically with the SharePoint team for almost 11 years now. Let me go ahead and share with you the agenda that I was planning to walk you through today. I'll briefly mention what the trend we are seeing in the security landscape, and then top level, what are the security pivots that we use to sharpen our protection story. And then we'll get into what are the new controls specifically around sensitivity labels, and I have lots of demos to walk you through. And then finally, we'll finish up with a quick roadmap slide and Q&A session as well. Now let's start with the security landscape. So as you all know, most of us are working from home. I would say all of us, I guess. About 300 million global office workers are actually expected to working from home. And recent survey actually have indicated that 40% of the CFOs indicate that CISOs indicate that information security is a primary risk when everyone is actually remotely working. Because when we were in a normal work life, you had only a few percentage of your workforce typically works remotely. But now all of your workforce is working remotely. So the security becomes even more important in these days. And then 69% of the CXOs indicate that the employee health and the safety is the key consideration. Now, if you double click on the information security, one of the trend we are really seeing is what's called the zero trust model. Like gone are the days where you had to work inside your firewall, your corporate content always live within your corporate network, and you need to VPN in to access your corporate data. These days, the data lives in the cloud, or the users are actually expecting to access the data from anywhere, from any devices, from any applications. That's the new norm that we are living in. And this is exactly what we mean by zero trust model, in the sense that we need to define the security strategy of protecting your data in a way that all the different layers that you think through, and then corporate data is accessible at the same time from anywhere and any devices and any locations as well. So really, it comes to four major aspects. One is having a strong user identity. So make sure that when the users are authenticating, we have a strong way of protecting that. Second of all, what devices that users are using to access your corporate data. So being able to manage it, or even if they come from unmanaged devices, providing them productivity at the same time, to some level securing your corporate data. And then what apps that they use or services they use to access your corporate data. And then finally, in the context of access, you always want to follow the least privileged access principle so that you provide the access to the corporate data, but only to the extent whatever needed privileges are, but not giving them so much access, super admin access and so on, if they don't need it. So really, if they need to get a job done, just provide the limited privileges that they need to access that particular corporate data. So that's why this is around the zero trust model. And this is a very common pattern across the industry. And even within Microsoft, we take that into really consideration while we think about our security pivots and our security strategies moving forward. Now, let me briefly spend some time on security pivots that we normally think about and providing our controls for each of the security pivot. I would put them in 4 major pivots. The first is all about users. So in this category of pivot, as you know, we have both internal employees who are full-time employees, they have contractual agreement with us, and they follow the corporate rules and so on from an ethical boundary as well. And then also you have external users, which are loosely referred as guest users, that come and collaborate with your internal employees on a specific project purposes. So you need to be mindful of the segments between internal employees versus the external users. Perhaps you have specific policies needs to be in place when external users come in and accessing your corporate data, ensuring they get to access only the content or projects collaterals that are intended for those external users. Then the second aspect is MFA policy. So MFA here stands for multi-factor authentication. It's really passwords are good, but at the same time, we're actually moving into the passwordless model. And MFA, multi-factor authentication, is becoming a new norm. And it has to be, because you really want to have stronger authentications as a first gate of your security when users, be it both internal or external users, accessing your corporate data. And then finally, sharing policies. As many of you know, we have SharePoint and OneDrive and Teams has many sharing policy capabilities. You can configure your site collection all the way from only accessible by internal employees to authenticated guest users, and then all the way into the anyone users as well, meaning anybody who has a link can access the data, which is most permissive capability, and you can share a file with that particular most permissive control as well. So that's under the users pivot. Moving on to the devices pivot, as we all access our corporate data from mobile devices, managing those mobile devices is super critical. So this is where products like Intune comes into play so that you can manage your own employees' devices. At the same time, have unmanaged device policy, which is the fine-grained conditional access policy that we have in Office 365, such that if an employee or an external user accesses the corporate data from unmanaged devices, you provide them the appropriate access based on the sensitivity of the content. For example, you allow them full access if it is a general training material. You allow them limited access if it is confidential material, or you completely block them if it is a top secret site that they're trying to access from unmanaged device. And then the third one I would call out is the idle session timeout, which is in the unmanaged devices, you want to ensure that if the user is inactive for a certain period of time and the user forgets to click the sign out button, you will be able to kick them out of the sign in session so that inadvertently some unauthorized user doesn't come and start taking over the session. So this is what we refer as idle session timeout. This is something you can configure in the SharePoint and OneDrive experience. Then moving on to the third pivot around locations. And in this case, we specifically focus around the IP address. So you could create a control such that if the user is accessing my corporate data only from within this IP address range, only then they can access my corporate data. So this is most security-centric customers. They prefer this kind of approach because that way they have a definitive network range, IP address range, from which they know that the corporate access is only allowed. It's both at the SharePoint level as well as at the Azure Active Directory conditional access policy level. You can configure this IP address policy. And then the final pivot is around data itself. Like, how do we protect the information or the data? And this is where the sensitivity labels plays a vital role. And this journey, which I'll talk about most of the session, is around Microsoft information protection, where you can create sensitivity labels such as, let's say, general, confidential, top secret, and then protect your files as well as the sites and the teams as well, so that based on the sensitivity, you will now be able to dictate what policies, security policies, need to be protected, need to be honored for those content. And then finally, we have automatic classification, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. All these policies are available, generally available, except the 2 items that I have. Those are available as public preview. So you will be able to take advantage or try out these security policies. And I have short URLs coming up so that I can walk you through on where you can go and learn about these policies. Sensitivity labels are really about helping you to easily classify your data and detect and label your sensitive content in your enterprise corpus. As every company going through the digital transformation, we are seeing ever increasing digital data. So classification becomes even more important in this digital world. Second of all, with these labels, you can associate richer policies, both security and access policies, such that if a label is applied to a file or to a team or a site, the appropriate policy will automatically get honored. Third of all, these policies are actually consistent across sites, teams, and Office 365 groups. So you don't have to worry about managing multiple places to provide a consistent and unified policies for your ecosystem. And finally, these are unified labels across M365. And what I mean by that is you create them at the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, and all the Microsoft 365 resources, such as SharePoint sites, OneDrive, Teams, Files Experience, and Office apps, all of them will now be able to expose these labels so that the end user will have a consistent experience. Let me actually get into some demos of this particular experience so that you can see them in action. So I'm going to go to the demo mission here. So here I am in the M365 Compliance Center. As you can see, I have created general, confidential, M&A legal, top secret, and financial department specific labels. So for example, if I go and click on the confidential label, I can see the policies that are configured for this label. So for example, I have sites and group settings are configured as private, and then allow limited and web-only access. So let me actually go ahead and click the edit label here. So it allows you to pick a name. You can provide a description for this label that is visible to your end user. So this is as per your organization schema, you can provide the tooltip that you want to show to the end users. And then you can go ahead and click next. You can select an encryption policy for this particular label. And then you can also set the watermark policy. So for example, in this case, I have a confidential text that needs to show up as the watermark if this confidential label gets applied to the file. And then specifically around sites and groups settings for teams, sites, and group settings, you can set 3 different categories, 3 different policies. One is, what's the privacy you want for this Office 365 group? So you have a choice of private or public. And then second of all, external user access. Do you want to allow external guest users to be added as members for these Office 365 groups or not? So you can select them right here. And then the third one is a very interesting policy where unmanaged device policy. If a resource is being accessed from an unmanaged device with this label, which is the confidential label, what's the experience you want to provide them? You can say, I want to allow full access or allow limited access, limited web-only access. That means user can see the site, but they cannot download the files. Or you can completely block access. Let's say I'm creating a M&A legal top secret as a label. Then of course I would want to choose block access because I don't want users to access those top secret content from my unmanaged devices. So by setting all these policies under that one label, let me go ahead and finish this label setting. So here is the another auto labeling capabilities, which I will talk about it in a minute. So this is it. So you basically have configured all the relevant policies for this label. And let's actually go ahead and see how the label experience looks like from an end user perspective. So here I am in a Teams experience. I'm logged into my investment bankers team. And for this demo session's purpose, I'm an employee in Contoso Bank Corporation. I'm part of the investment banking team. So you can first of all see the sensitivity as a first-class experience right here in the Teams files experience. I can see that banking strategies document is labeled as top secret. I can also see that group's international product launch, which is another file, is also labeled as confidential. So if I try to open these files, so let's say group international product launch, as you can see here, this particular file is marked with confidential as the watermark here. And this watermark is being added here mainly because this particular file is flagged as confidential. And that's the reason the file watermark is saying confidential. And as you can see, the rest of the labels are also available for me under the sensitivity experience. And at the status bar, right here at the bottom, you can see that the labels show up as well. So if the label has encryption policy attached to it, then you will see that lock icon show up in this particular experience. So that's how easy it is for the end user to be able to select a label, and across the files experience, be it Word, Excel, or PowerPoint, now the appropriate watermark, header, and footer will also get applied. Now let's take a look at quickly on the container sites experience. So for example, here I am in the SharePoint home. And if I go ahead and click create a site, and let's say I'm going to create a team site, and let me give it a big site name for it, PnP demo site. And as you can see, first of all, the options right here available for me to pick the sensitivity of this particular site. And the same list available for me: general, confidential, M&A legal, top secret, and none. And if I want to know, if I want to decide which is the right label for me, I can click on this eye icon right here. That shows me as an end user what my admin has configured or informing me. Right here it tells me general, confidential, and you can tailor this experience text, whatever the specific appropriate text is for your organization. So in this particular case, I can go ahead and create confidential. And the moment I select confidential, notice that privacy option grayed out, and it shows me automatically that private is being applied for this particular group. So that's how, from an end user perspective, they just pick their label. Behind the scene, the rest of the security policies will get applied. Now, in the interest of time, I actually have created already a site, which is the investment banker site I told you, with the confidential as the label. So you can see at the top here, we also show you right in the navigation bar that the confidential label is then applied for this site collection. And because I'm logging in from an unmanaged device, and the unmanaged device policy is enabled for this label, you can see that yellow information bar that shows up at the top. And it clearly tells me that my organization doesn't allow me to download, print, or sync using this unmanaged device. And that's why on this files experience, I don't have the option to download these files into my local device because this device is an unmanaged device. So that kind of shows you an idea of how the policies, both at the file level as well as at the team and the site collection level, are being seamlessly shown to the end user and taken into account. Now let's take this one step further. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my first screen to do a quick search. Give me one sec. There we go. OK, so let's go to the search experience in the SharePoint home. We're going to click on cancel here. So imagine that some of these protected files that I have, and I have access to some of them already, right? And these are encrypted files that are sitting in SharePoint and OneDrive, and I have access to them. In the previous era, before we enable this experience, you cannot search for those protected files. Now we are glad to let you know that we have enabled that capability as well. So for example, I have a top secret project called Red Zone that is one of the top secret files that is always encrypted. And I have access to those files. Now, when I search for that in my enterprise search experience, Red Zone, I can see a file showed up for me. And this particular file, if I go and click on it, it will actually show me up that the file from my branding site. And it actually has the text, the Red Zone right here, and is a top secret labeled file itself. So you can see at the bottom status bar that it has the lock icon. That means the encryption policy is actually applied for it. So what it shows you is, as an end user, now you can search for these encryption protected files in SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as well. And this is a huge step forward from a productivity experience point of view for these end users. I hope you guys, you folks love this experience. Now let me go back to the PowerPoint. So I'm sure many of you are thrilled to try this out. So if you are one of me, I would like to let you know that we have made generally available the sensitivity labels with protection for files in the SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as of May 4th. And you can go to this aka.ms/m365 files labels GA for the announcement, as well as the link to the product documentation and how to get this enabled in your tenant. And then start working through this. Also, we have made the public preview for sensitivity labels for Teams, sites, and Office 365 groups. And we're also looking at enabling this for general availability in the next few months. You can learn more about this particular feature at aka.ms/m365 sites labels. Okay, let me pause there for a minute. Vesa, any questions that I should answer at this point?
I'm unmuting myself. So there was a few questions related on licensing, and is it in governmental accounts or tenants? The typical set of questions related on that. Can you comment on anything on that?
I see. So from a licensing point of view, you really need, for just getting the basic labels available for your tenant, you need to have an E license, E1 or E3 license. You will be able to then create the appropriate labels. But then the policies that you want to apply to the label. So for example, for encryption policy, you need to have the RMS service license. Then for the device policy, the unmanaged device policy that I showed you, you need to have Azure Active Directory Premium Plan 1 license. Those are the two licenses required if you need those two policies. But if you need the basic workflow, then you can just have an E1, E3 license and then enable the Office 365 group settings.
Good. Then there was a question related on, are there any plans to make the sensitivity label available for PDF documents?
For PDF, yes, definitely, yes. This is definitely in our radar. We are working, as our next backlog, our roadmap items to bring forward PDF support as well. Absolutely.
Then we have a few developers on the call, and they're interested on the API and extensibility model. Is there a way to automate this stuff remotely?
Yes, absolutely. We do have PowerShells and APIs available, both MS Graph APIs and REST APIs in SharePoint. And I will share the article link to that. That way you can get the labels on a file or on this particular site. You can get them and set the labels as well. At a specific site level, basically, this is another SP site property that we have added. Then you can basically enumerate them or set them as well at the site collection level.
Cool. A lot of other questions as well. I think we need to come back on those. You have some additional content to go through, so let's continue for a while. I'll collect some of the questions on the side.
Sounds good. Okay, thank you, Vesa. Okay, so let's continue on. The next topic that I want to cover is automatic classification with sensitivity labels. So what I showed you in the previous demos is manually the users can go into the file or go into the SharePoint site creation time and pick a label, right? That is the typical process that I showed you before. But especially in the files authoring experiences, users sometimes forget or they neglect to label their sensitive data. But at the same time, as an enterprise security and compliance admin, you do want to detect these files and label them as well so that appropriate security policies are always governing these files. And this is where automatic classification comes into play. As you know, we have over 100 sensitive information types that is out of the box available in our system, in our service. And you can use those to create these auto labeling policies. So for example, you can imagine if a file has more than 10 credit card numbers in it, then you want to label the file automatically as confidential, right? So you can create policies like that, which are rules-based, using these 100+ sensitive information types. Also, these automatic classification policies, we do want to help you to simulate them first and fine-tune the policies before you actually publish these automatic labeling policies in your service. And that's where Policy Simulator comes into play. So now let me actually quickly show you what that experience looks like. So I'm going to go back to my browser here, which is, I think, this one right here. So here I am in the Information Protection tab again, where I have created the labels. And if you notice on the top, we have a new tab called Automatic Labeling Preview. And if you click on that particular tab, here is where you can create these auto labeling policies for SharePoint and OneDrive, and also Teams. Basically, all the data that is residing in these services, files data, you can now create auto labeling policy here. So as you can see here, I have created a couple of policies, and 3 of them are under simulation right now. And then 2 of them are already enabled and working in my tenant itself. So for example, if I take the US financial data in OneDrive, or let me go ahead and click on that. And you can see that it basically ran the simulation and it came back to me. There is not specific matches found. And I can actually target specific sites. So in this particular case, I have targeted OneDrive of a specific users. In this case, the Seisha user account is what I have targeted. And of course, you can target many OneDrive sites as well. So you can select the high-profile users OneDrive if you wanted to target those as the OneDrive location. Also, you can target SharePoint sites as well, not just OneDrive sites. So you can select the specific SharePoint sites URLs and then being able to target that as well. So for example, if I click on edit option, let me quickly show you what that experience looks like. So here I am OneDrive accounts. I can choose the accounts as I just talked about, and I can click on SharePoint sites, and then I can go ahead and click on choose sites, and which will let me select specific sites URLs. I can type it in and then add them to my policy as well. And also we do that for Exchange mailboxes too, as you can see here. And this is mainly for data in transit. When you send a mail, these rules will be applied for that too. So that's how easy it is to create a policy or select a location specifically for your auto labeling policy. Then the next thing you'd select is the rules for this policy. So for example, here I have created US financial data, credit card data. So the condition is if the file contains credit card number, US bank account number, and ABA routing number, and the content is shared with the external users, then it will be picked up in this particular rule. Or I can then select high volume, low volume in the sense how many number of occurrences of this credit card number needs to be there in a given file to trigger this particular policy. So for high volume, I've set it up as 10. For a low volume, for high volume, I set it up as I think 20 in this particular case. So that's how you configure these rules. Now, if you want to create and add a new rule, you just click on create rule. You add your name here, and then you can add the condition. I want to look for specific sensitive types. So you can add the specific sensitive types. Like I said, there are 100+ sensitive information types available out of the box for you to pick from. So you can select them here. So for example, Finland national ID, or you get the idea here. So you can pick any of the available sensitive information types. And also, if you have a custom sensitive information types, you can add them as well, and then those will become available for you for selection as well. So I'm going to go ahead and click next here, and that's basically the experience to pick the location, pick the rules, and then finally you need to pick the label that you want to apply. So in this case, I can pick top secret or highly confidential, or the other labels that I have in my organization. So I can pick that label, and hence if the rules satisfy that particular, if the file satisfies that particular rule, then the corresponding label will get applied. Okay, so that's how you configure an auto labeling policy. And as I said, whenever you create an auto labeling policy, the first thing you do is run it in a policy simulation mode so that you get the results back on how many files potentially are going to be auto labeled due to this policy. And if you're satisfied with that, then you can say publish the policy. And that's really what happens here. If I go back to the list view of the auto labeling policy that I created, so you can see I have 2 policies that I have applied for and that are actually running in my service. So let's take a look at what one of those policies looks like. So here I have a site collection, micro banking strategies is the site collection that I have targeted this auto labeling policy. And as you can see, I have a sensitivity column wherein all the top secret confidential labels are showing up for these labels. And if you hover over and leave it there, you can see it says that this file has been automatically labeled. So we also tell you for a given file, if it is it labeled automatically or is it labeled manually? So in this case, this file, customer credit card numbers, is automatically labeled because the user forget to label it. That's why the system picked up and labeled it. And on the other hand, I think there are other items, like, for example, this particular new product overview PowerPoint is actually labeled manually as well. OK, so we give you that flavor, whether it is automatically or manually labeled. And also, it shows you that even if the users neglect, system will pick up and ensure that the sensitive content is protected. OK, let me go back to the slide here. So this particular feature, auto classification with sensitivity labels, is available as public preview. You can go to aka.ms/SPO auto classification to try out these features and give us our feedback. And this is, I know the licensing question will come up. This is actually an E5 premium feature. So if you have an E5 trial, then you will be able to try this out feature. So let me pause there for a minute. Vesa, any questions?
So quite a lot of questions. So it's good to see
the
interest
topic
on
always
the topic.
has a lot of interest. Go ahead.
Good. Can you target Microsoft Teams chat or a channel with sensitivity labels? That's an interesting one as well.
The team itself, when you create a team, you can pick a sensitivity label. And that's what we call the holistic view. Then that label protects everything that inside the team, including the files experience that I talked about. We don't have the capability where a specific chat or a specific channel within the team, you can set the label. We don't have that capability yet. It's a good feedback. We will definitely take that into consideration.
And that relates on another question, which is, so if you set it in the site level, then it labels automatically everything in the site. Is that true?
No. If you set it at the site level only, then that site collection policies, such as the device policy that I mentioned and the external guest access and the privacy policy, those are the policies that will get honored. We are looking at one of the roadmap feature, which is if you set it at the site collection level, then the corresponding encryption policy, if the label has an encryption policy, those will get honored by all the files underneath the site collection as well. That is one of our roadmap item. We are looking at it.
Okay. Two more, and then I think we have a few more slides. So will this work also on a classic site if you have any existing classic SharePoint sites? So is there a difference between that?
That's a great question. Yes, you can apply the sensitivity label on a classic site as well. However, like I said, the policies, which is the device policy, corresponding policies, if it is available, only those policies will get honored in the classic sites. Typically, you don't need to have a groups connected site, let me put it that way, in order to apply this label. Any simple modern SharePoint site or communication site, for example, you can apply the same sensitivity label.
Great. And then last one, because I know that you still have some content, so we'll get back on hopefully in the end.
Okay.
Is it possible to, do we have any options to automate auto label policy using a PowerShell or any SDK? So again, people are thinking on automating this to a multiple tenants.
Yeah, so I think, so this is mainly, we do have an MIP SDK. And as I said, there are APIs available in SharePoint and in MS Graph, and we are, increasing that API surface. I wouldn't say that everything is available as of today. There are a few APIs available to retrieve the labels of the sites or the files, and we are working on adding more capabilities in that regard. The automatic classification that I just walked you through, the demo with the auto labeling policy and so on, we don't have those as APIs yet. In fact, that is, as you can see, it has more, I would say, closer in terms of extensive files. It could potentially just touch all the files in your tenant. So that's why we are starting in a very thoughtful fashion, giving you the control through our auto labeling simulation experience. And then we will look at how to gradually increase it into exposing as a programmatic API eventually.
Sure. Cool.
Okay.
Let's continue now, and let's see if we have time in the end, because just a few slides to go through.
Perfect. The last, in this corresponding notion, I want to talk about Content Explorer. And this is the experience where, so now that we have this capability for labeling your enterprise corpus, the next obvious question is, I would like, we want to give you ability to look at the whole enterprise corpus and say, how many files are actually labeled? And in what category? Are they top secret, confidential, or general? And more importantly, are there site collections that are not labeled? And perhaps those are your weakest link where you do need to run the auto classification like a premium feature to detect the sensitive files and then also to auto label them as well. So this is where the Content Explorer view comes into play. So we provide you a full holistic view of all the files and the site collections that are labeled here. Also, you can look at in Office 365 audit logs, the full experience there as well. So for example, if I go back to my slide, my demo mission here real quick, so I can show you here. Here is the data classification Content Explorer view. So right here, you can immediately see what are the sensitive information types used in your tenant. This is across the tenant. And you can also see what labels are heavily used. So in my case, in this particular demo tenant, I have top secret label heavily used, followed by confidential, followed by M&A legal top secret. So we show you this activity. And if you go into the Content Explorer, you get even much richer granularity on insights across sensitive information types, sensitivity labels, like what labels are being used, and so on. So here I can see that credit card number is around 28 files in my tenant are using or having credit card numbers in them. EU debit card number, 25 files are having them. On the other hand, if I wanted to see by sensitivity label, I can see them as well. And of course, as you look at these, let's say top secret, if you want to double click on it, and if you wanted to know exactly which site collections are having those files, you can now drill down them as well. And similarly, Activity Explorer gives you the complete activity, which user labeled which file or which particular site collection. You can get that view as well. So not only here, also in Office 365 audit log, you get the full capability as well. So if you go for activity type like sensitivity, you get the activity of, so for example, Sesha has removed a sensitivity label from a site. He applied the label to a file. And then when you click on a specific activity, it will tell you exactly which site that item, that particular label activity got done. So we ensure that the end-to-end, you can see the full visibility as well. Now let me go back to the screen PowerPoint here. But there is actually more coming. One additional capability I want to call out is the sensitive information. You may want to protect it from the get-go, meaning when the user uploads a document into SharePoint, OneDrive, or Teams, from the get-go, you may want to protect it. Because even if you have automatic labeling turned on, it might take some time for the engine to come and pick up and detect that the file has content in it. So that's why we have this feature called block external access by default. And this is the tenant level feature that you can turn on. The idea here is that if you are a very security-centric enterprise corpus, every upload that happens to the service until a DLP scan happens on the file, you don't want that file to be externally shareable, because that avoids and protects your content from leaking to the wrong hands. Of course, once a DLP scan has run and an auto labeling policy has applied the auto label to it, then it's OK. Now you know that the file has no sensitive content, or it has sensitive content. Now the appropriate DLP policy has been applied. So that's why we brought this feature called protect sensitive information from the get-go. So this is one other feature I want to highlight it. So just to summarize, I know I covered a lot of ground on this topic. And labels protection for files, I showed you the search experience. Also labels protection, labels for sites and teams experience, automatic classification. And then I showed you quickly the Content Explorer and Office 365 audit log view. And I finished with the DLP block external access by default as well. So that's the overall view there. The only last item I want to leave you with, and then I'll open up for questions, is we have more stuff coming in this security space. One additional feature that I want to give you a kind of a teaser at this point is, so imagine you have segmented users in your enterprises, like investment bankers and advisors, and you want to allow them to be in their own segregated, segmented view, such that the contents that are associated with investment bankers is available only for investment bankers. The content like Teams or SharePoint site associated with advisors are only accessible by advisory users. And the user who sits in the middle, like the general users, they cannot access none of those content. And this is the very, I would say, compliance-heavy, security-heavy feature or customers who really want to ensure the investment banking content or sites are only accessible by investment bankers. The advisory content or sites are accessible only by advisory users. So that's how you bring in the barrier even within your own organization to ensure that, for example, insider trading like scenarios cannot happen in the organization. It's a very big, especially in financial industries, a very big compliance need. And this is called information barrier. So you can create an information barrier, create some segments in your organization, and then create, like the UX shows here, barrier between investment bankers and advisory bankers. So as the picture shows here, you are actually blocking the communication and collaboration between these two user segments. And an example scenario here, just to be clear, this is not just for financial customers. There are a lot of energy customers and healthcare customers where they need such a advanced security scenario. One example reference scenario I always use is the FINRA compliance in the financial and FSI sector. That's where this is heavily used. And I know I'm getting to the closer to the time, so I'm going to skip that particular demo, and I'm going to go right into the roadmap slide, and then I will leave it here for questions. So real quick, I've showed you the sensitivity labels for teams and sites. That's already in preview, and it's going to GA this summer. Sensitivity labels with protection for files is already GA'd as of last week. Automatic classification with sensitivity labels, the demo I showed you, it's in public preview. We plan to GA that in the summer as well. The block external access by default, this is to protect your sensitive data from the get-go. It's actually available as GA for SharePoint sites, so you can already use them now. For OneDrive, we are working on it, and it will come to GA in the next few months. Information barrier that I briefly touched on is actually available in preview for SharePoint and Teams connected sites. And we're planning to GA a flavor of this in the summer as well. And finally, expiring permissions for external access. I didn't get a chance to try it out, show it to you today, but we have this cool feature for if the external users today invite them to a SharePoint site or a file, they get access until you go and revoke them, right? And that brings up the problem of stale permissions that are being there. And we are now providing you a way to say any external access users that are coming trying to access content in your tenant, you can say after 60 days that access goes away. And if the site owner or if the site owner wants to, he can extend that access. So that's what this expiring permissions for external users looks like. So those are the available things that are coming up in the summer, through summer. And then we also have a few items by the end of the calendar year. The Content Explorer, the view that I've showed you, I think that will very soon GA as well. The co-auth experience, which I didn't get a chance to show it to you today, but the protected files, you can actually co-author them in Office on the web as well. But for Office Rich Client, we are working on bringing that forward. And then also the multi-factor authentication at a site level. So imagine you have a top secret site, and now you want to enforce multi-factor authentication. You can use that. You can do that as well. That's something we are working on in our roadmap item. And finally, instant session revocation. So if you have a compromised user account, you can instantly revoke their session, and that will get honored across SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams as well. So that's my roadmap slide. I think it's a good slide to leave open, and then I will take a few more questions. Back to you, Reza. Any questions?
Yeah, so plenty of questions.
Yes.
So let's actually walk a few of them through. So I'm going to take the one development related. Well, not development related. Can we add manage properties in the condition for a policy? That's a good question from Shayo Mendes.
Manage the properties.
I think it's search
conditions.
manage properties as a condition
for
a policy.
Oh, I see. Conditions. And this is for the automatic classification,
correct,
right?
Correct. For the automatic, yes.
Okay. Definitely, that's a good feedback. It's not there today in this V1 version, but definitely we will. That's a great feedback. So we will take that.
That's actually an interesting idea. That's clever.
Yeah.
But then there was quite a few different kind of questions. So does Office 2016 and Office 2019 have integration in their RMS? and the sensitivity labels out of the box. So do you need to install something, or is the Office clients automatically native support of this?
Yeah, Office clients, especially the desktop clients, the Office Pro Plus and the 2019 that you mentioned automatically has this native support now. That's actually the biggest work that we have done on the client side itself. So they do have the native support. And of course, it doesn't go all the way into like 2013 client or 2010 client like that, but only for the Pro Plus and the 2019 client, it will have it. And as you can see here, one of the items I called out is Office Rich Client co-auth for protected files. That's a specific feature that we are working on. That is not there yet, but you can open the file in Pro Plus or in 2019. You can see the sensitivity label, and you can apply the label on the file.
Good. Good. And now we're hitting the hour. I'm going to ask one more question. I do apologize. We missed quite a few of the questions. Thank you, by the way, for those who were answering and helping on the questions in the chat as well. But there is a tech community links, which David Warner already shared on the chat as well. And if you go to them in the SharePoint blog, as an example, and those are messages from Shesha, and he can probably answer if there's any questions related on which we didn't answer. But there was a good question from Sean. So setting labels, and Francesco, by Power Automate, can I manage the labels? So can I basically create a flow to automate labels in a Power Automate side?
That's a great thinking and the feedback there. We haven't yet finished the integration with the Power Automate and ability to set these properties in the files in SharePoint. And definitely that is one of the integrations that we are looking into it, and we will keep you posted as we progress on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Sesha. Now, also one more question. Is it fine for you to share the slides with me so I can actually put them in the presentation which we shared? Up to you either way. So.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Yep.
Yeah.
I will include the slides in the presentation, which will be attached to the recording blog post, which will go live later tomorrow. So in 24 hours, it will be live in a YouTube channel. And from there, it's going to point out to our blog where you can actually find also the presentation. But that's it for now. So let's actually close up. So recording will be available in 24 hours in the Microsoft 365 and SharePoint Community YouTube channel at AKMS in 365 PnP videos. Follow us on Twitter. SharePoint actually is missing from there. Next M365 General Dev call, so more development-oriented call, is happening this Thursday with 2 topics, which are more both concentrating on Microsoft Teams. SharePoint Framework call is on 21st of May, and then the next community call is on June 9th as well. So for the June 9th, we actually already have a topic which is going to be search, modern search, natively out-of-the-box capabilities and new features over there. Now, there's a massive list of different community calls which we are executing in the dev or non-dev areas as well. Whatever is suitable for you, join them. Everything is getting recorded and shared within the YouTube channel, so please take advantage of these options. And that's it for now. So thank you, Sesha. Really great presentation. We had 286, I think, was the record attendance today. So it's good to see also that Teams is now increasing the limit, so we are above 250 in this course, which is really, really cool.
Awesome.
But thank you, Sesha. And thank you for all of the questions. And I think that's it for now. So thank you, everybody who joined, and for your input around the features.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.